There is a heartbreaking story told by millions of loving dog owners. It's the belief that as your senior dog nears the end, they will silently wander off into the woods or crawl under the darkest porch, hiding away so you won't have to witness their final moments. When an ailing companion actually disappears, it leaves a devastating emotional scar. We want to believe it was a conscious, selfless sacrifice. According to the Psychology of Human-Animal Bond in 2019, we often try to cover our own grief by assigning human motives to animal behavior. But what is really happening? It's not about selfless empathy. It's about something much deeper. A 2017 paper in the Journal of Anthrozoology points out that while this self-isolation is incredibly common, the motive behind it gets completely distorted. We naturally project complex human empathy onto our dogs, imagining they are calculating their departure to spare our feelings. But the biological reality driving your dog out of the yard is something entirely different and far more scientifically profound. Researchers at the Canine Cognition Center in 2018 took a hard look at this. They found that while your dog is intensely attuned to your current emotional state, able to smell stress or read your micro-expressions, they completely lack the specific frontal lobe structures required to conceptualize the future. What this means is that your dog literally does not have the hardware to imagine a scenario where they are gone and you are sad tomorrow. Behaviorally, planning for future grief just isn't possible. Look at the Cognitive Science of Domestic Dogs released in 2015. The idea of leaving to protect someone requires projecting a complicated, long-term causal chain of events. It requires thinking, if I stay, I will die here, and if I die here, my human will suffer. That level of abstract timeline generation is far beyond their evolutionary limits. So, if they aren't running away to protect you, why are they leaving the safety of the living room at 2 in the morning? This brings us to the harshest truth. A clinical palliative vet study in 2019 found that the true culprit behind 80% of senior dogs wandering off is not a noble act of love. It is canine cognitive dysfunction, or CCD. This is essentially the canine equivalent of Alzheimer's disease. Your dog isn't making a conscious choice to leave the yard, they are experiencing a catastrophic breakdown of their spatial awareness. It's not an intentional departure, it's a terrifying loss of the very map that tells them where home is. To understand why this happens, we have to look inside the brain. A 2020 paper in the Neurobiology of Aging showed that in a dog's twilight years, toxic proteins called beta-amyloid plaques accumulate heavily in the cerebral cortex. Just like in human neurodegeneration, these plaques physically destroy the delicate neural pathways responsible for spatial memory and navigation. The hallway they have walked down 10,000 times suddenly becomes an unrecognizable labyrinth. They aren't trying to leave, they have simply forgotten what being inside feels like. Researchers mapping out the veterinary palliative care matrix in 2021 documented a cluster of symptoms known as DISHA. The first letter D stands for disorientation. This is why you might find your senior dog walking in tight circles, staring blankly at the hinge side of a door, or becoming hopelessly lost physically in their own fenced backyard. When a dog in this state slips out an open gate, they aren't marching toward a quiet death. They are locked in a fugue state, entirely unable to process the geography of their environment, and this often happens under the cover of darkness. According to veterinary behavior medicine studies in 2016, as the pineal gland degrades, their circadian rhythm shatters. The biological clock that tells them it is time to sleep simply breaks. This means your dog might jolt awake at 3 in the morning in a state of absolute chemical panic. They lose behavioral inhibition and begin pacing or sleepwalking out of an open doggy door, driven by pure motor restlessness rather than any conscious destination. But why don't they just sniff their way back? Researchers investigating olfactory pathologies in canines in 2018 found the answer. As the brain ages, the olfactory lobe rapidly shrinks. The dog loses their biological GPS. The familiar scent pathways of your front porch and the oak tree in the yard are instantly wiped out. The colorful, scent-painted world they used to navigate goes completely dark, leaving them entirely adrift in the shadows. When you combine this scent blindness with cataracts that blur their vision and age-related hearing loss that muffles your shouting voice, the dog entirely loses their three-dimensional map of the world. A 2017 study in applied animal behavior science noted that when senior dogs are stripped of these sensory anchors, they experience an intense reality distortion. They push forward simply because staying still in a terrifying void is biologically unacceptable. This is the true tragedy of the wandering dog. Research on behavioral responses in senior dogs from 2020 shows that once they stumble outside the familiar fence line, panic takes over. The brain triggers an automatic, passive impulse to walk straight ahead just to avoid bumping into obstacles. They are not rationally seeking a final resting place. They are trapped in a constant, linear motion, desperately trying to walk out of the confusion that is actually happening entirely inside their own head. But there is another, purely physiological reason. A dog will try to wedge themselves into dark, tight spaces at the very end. Beyond the neurological deficits of dementia lies the reality of systemic decline. As their vitality drops, the circulatory system goes into an emergency protocol. It constricts peripheral blood vessels, desperately pulling warm blood away from the skin and limbs to protect the heart and the brain. A 2021 study in the Journal of Veterinary Physiology details how this operational crisis effectively destroys the hypothalamus. That is the part of the brain that regulates body heat. Without it, their core temperature can critically plummet, even in the middle of a warm summer afternoon. The sudden, agonizing cold running through their frail bones triggers a primal response that looks exactly like they are running away to die. When your dog crawls deep under a dark porch or burrows into a dense thicket of bushes, it is not a search for spiritual solitude. Research on canine nesting instincts from 2017 shows this is actually a primitive thermoregulation tactic. They are using the tightest, most enclosed space they can find to trap whatever tiny fraction of body heat they still produce. They are literally trying to build a thermal nest. And we cannot ignore the role of profound pain in this equation. A 2020 analysis in the Neuroscience of Animal Pain explains that the final days of organ decline throw the autonomic nervous system into absolute chaos. As the kidneys or liver struggle, toxins build up in the bloodstream, creating a state of sensory overload. Their nerve endings become agonizingly hypersensitive to every tiny input from the environment around them. Researchers in the Journal of Veterinary Neurology in 2019 documented how this changes a senior dog's reality. Normal household footsteps vibrating through the floorboards feel like massive shocks. Bright fluorescent kitchen lights translate into piercing neurological pain, a condition called photophobia. When the living room becomes a chamber of sensory torture, the brain issues an undeniable command: find the darkest, tightest, and quietest corner possible immediately to shut down the incoming stimuli. To really grasp the power of this behavior, we have to look back thousands of years. A 2016 study in evolutionary canid ethology traced this isolation sequence directly to their wild wolf ancestors. In the brutal economy of the wilderness, wandering off or isolating at the end of life is an inborn survival code. It is an instinct specifically designed by evolution to protect the rest of the pack from what happens next. Data from survival ethology in mammals, also published in 2016, reveals the grim mathematics of the wild. A severely weakened animal automatically emits stress and disease pheromones heavily into the air. These chemical signals attract apex predators from miles away. By instinctively hiding at the far outer edge of their territory, the dying animal effectively acts as a decoy. They lure the danger away from the nursing den and the healthy reproducing members. Furthermore, predatory mammals carry an intense, unforgiving biological pressure to hide fatal weaknesses from their own peers to maintain pack hierarchy. It's not about sparing your feelings. It is a primal command embedded so deeply in their DNA that it overrides 15 years of domestic comfort. In their final moments of confusion, the ancient wolf briefly takes over the beloved golden retriever. This is exactly why we have to stop romanticizing this deeply painful behavior. In 2022, the American Journal of Veterinary Medicine issued a stark warning. Believing that a senior pet is just going away to pass peacefully on their own terms actively robs them of vital protection. It masks the alarming truth that they are utterly alone, freezing, and battling severe cognitive psychosis or pain. When we tell ourselves a comforting story, we fail to lock the gates. The reality of what happens out there in the dark is devastating. Elderly pet welfare studies from 2023 revealed that the vast majority of wandering senior dogs do not experience a peaceful, natural passing under a quiet tree. Instead, they meet tragic, drawn-out ends. They succumb to severe hypoglycemia, extreme dehydration, or they get physically wedged tight into storm drains or under fences where they simply cannot back out. The mandatory solution for anyone loving a senior dog is active prevention. According to Clinical Pet Psychology and Ethics in 2021, we must implement physical barriers before the crisis hits. Block off staircases at night, patch every hole in the fence, and use a collar bell to instantly alert you if they begin disoriented sleepwalking. You have to essentially baby-proof the house for an elderly, fading mind, and when they do show the desperate need to hide, accommodate it safely. Instead of letting them wedge behind the washing machine, proactively build a comforting den right inside the quietest room of your home. Use orthopedic warming pads to stabilize their core temperature. Cover the sleeping crate with heavy blankets to ensure absolute darkness and muffle the frightening household sounds. Give them the dark cave their neurobiology is screaming for, but keep them completely safe. We also have to urgently break the stigma around compassionate end-of-life care. If your dog is endlessly pacing, unable to recognize you, and constantly trying to blindly flee their own home, they are trapped in a failing body. Consulting your veterinarian about humane euthanasia is not giving up. It is using modern medical intervention to instantly end the terrifying neurological paralysis when the dog can no longer safely navigate reality. Processing this complete scientific picture changes everything. It liberates you from the heartbreaking illusion of abandonment. The dog that followed you into the bathroom for a decade does not suddenly want to die alone. Understanding the science restores your rightful duty to escort their fading heartbeat all the way to an honorable, peaceful end, rather than letting the cold wilderness take them. Your loyal dog of 15 years never calculated a betrayal. They never made a conscious choice to reject your love or run away to spare your feelings. They are simply adrift in a dying mind, operating on chemical commands and ancient instincts that are millions of years older than domestication itself. As the dusk finally clouds their brain, they are completely blinded by cognitive decline and instinctual panic. Every step away from you is just a tragic mistake of a broken mental compass. So rather than letting them wander off into the terrifying darkness to face it like a wild wolf, your greatest miracle as an owner is grabbing their collar, pulling them close, and holding them tightly until the light fully goes out.